Who put this here? Walter's trembling voice cracked through the quiet morning air, his hands clutching the rusted metal tag like it was still warm from his son's skin. For a moment, everything else in the park disappeared. The sound of pigeons, the distant chatter of joggers, even the wind that carried the faint smell of damp soil. Only that small tag existed, coated in dirt and years of silence. Daniel Warren, it read, the name etched faintly but clear enough to rip through time itself. His son's name, the one they'd told him was lost at sea, gone with no trace, no remains, no truth. Walter sank to his knees beside the marble statue, the one dedicated to our fallen heroes. He had polished that plaque every morning for 20 years, believing it honored men like his boy. But now, holding that tag, all he could see was mockery, a lie carved in stone. He stared at the soil where he'd found it, freshly disturbed despite the park's careful maintenance. Someone buried this here, he whispered, his voice low, trembling between rage and disbelief. He closed his fist around the tag until his palm bled. 20 years of grief turned to fire in a single heartbeat. That night, Walter sat at his kitchen table surrounded by faded photographs. Daniel in uniform, Daniel laughing, Daniel's enlistment letter. His hands traced the edges of each one, like they were pieces of a broken map. The news report he had once clung to, training accident, bodies unrecovered, now looked like a printed lie. He picked up the phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "It's me," he said quietly when a tired voice answered. "They lied about him, Harold. They buried his tag on the park." There was a long silence, then a rough exhale. "Walter, you need to let it go. That was decades ago." "Would you let it go if it was your son?" Walter asked, his tone sharp, eyes fixed on the tag lying under the dim lamp. The other man didn't answer. The line went dead, but the silence didn't end. It followed Walter into the night, whispering between the ticking of his old wall clock, each second daring him to uncover what really happened. The next morning, he returned to the park before dawn. The maintenance shed door creaked as he entered. The smell of oil and earth mixed with his steady breathing. He started digging near the statue again, slower this time, methodical. Beneath the damp soil, his shovel hit something solid, a small metal box, corroded but intact. Inside were 3 more tags, all from soldiers declared missing the same year as Daniel. Their names were familiar. The town mayor's nephew, the police chief's cousin, men who had lived. He'd seen them at parades. "My God," Walter whispered, stepping back, his knees weak. The realization hit like thunder. They weren't heroes. They were imposters. Someone had swapped the names, rewritten the sacrifice. His son and others had died, so the powerful could wear medals they never earned. The park wasn't a memorial. It was a grave of truth. That afternoon, Walter walked through the park during the mayor's visit, his hands clasped behind his back, hiding the blood-stained tags. The mayor's smile was wide, his voice rehearsed as he posed for cameras near the statue. "This park stands for honor," he said, "for those who gave everything." Walter's voice cut through the air before he could stop himself. "And for those who took everything too, right?" The crowd went silent. The mayor turned, startled. "Excuse me." Walter stepped forward, the metal glinting faintly in his hand. "Funny thing," he said, his tone calm, almost casual. "These were buried right under your statue. Wonder why the names don't match." A few gasps rippled through the crowd, but the mayor's security quickly ushered him away, muttering about confused veterans. Walter didn't resist. He just smiled faintly, watching them scatter like ants. That night back home, he laid out the recovered tags beside Daniel's photograph. The old clock struck midnight. Walter's reflection in the glass looked like a ghost finally remembering he'd once been alive. He whispered, "I know what they did to you, son, and they're going to remember too." His hands moved with quiet precision as he pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Inside, he began writing each name, each date, each lie. It was the beginning of something unstoppable, the kind of revenge that doesn't shout or burn but grows, quietly, like roots beneath the earth. For the first time in decades, Walter didn't feel old. He felt steady, purposeful, The soil had spoken, and he was ready to listen. As dawn crept through the window, the park outside looked peaceful again, but beneath its perfect grass, the truth was stirring. Walter pressed the tag against his chest, feeling the cold metal over his heart. Then he whispered a line that made the room fall still. "They buried your name, Daniel. Now I'll bury their peace." The clock ticked once, loud and final. It was the sound of time agreeing. "They used my boy's death to plant their lies," Walter whispered, staring at the framed photo of the town's dedication ceremony, his hands trembling as he traced the smiling faces in it. The mayor, the chief, the same men whose signatures marked the fake condolence letter he'd received 20 years ago. His eyes stopped at the background. The park under construction, the same ground where he had found Daniel's tag. He turned the photo over, finding faint pencil writing on the back, "For those who turned sacrifice into foundation." The words weren't his. Someone else had known. That night. He returned to the park, rain drumming softly on his hood as he pried open the maintenance gate with a rusted key. Inside the shed, the old records lay stacked in dusty boxes, their corners yellowed with age. He searched through them with shaking hands until a blueprint slipped out, stamped with a town seal, dated 2 decades earlier. On the margins, faded notes read, "Reduced material, budget cut approved." His pulse quickened. He'd been a builder once. He knew what those cuts meant. Less steel, cheaper foundation, unsafe ground. The bridge collapse that killed his son's unit wasn't fate. It was theft, sealed behind ink and official words. "You killed them to save money," he said under his breath, gripping the paper until it tore. The rain grew heavier outside, as if the sky had heard him. The next morning, Walter visited the local archives. He walked in quietly, his old boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. The young clerk behind the counter barely looked up when Walter asked for construction permits from 1998. "You'll have to fill out a request form," she said lazily. Walter smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides fury. "I helped build that park," he said. "I don't need permission to look at what's mine." His tone made her pause. Minutes later, he sat surrounded by old folders under flickering fluorescent light. Each page he opened was another ghost whispering through bureaucracy, altered budgets, redirected funds, names that repeated like poison. Mayor Kenneth, Chief Doyle, Councilman Rourke. The same trio who'd given speeches about community honor every year. But one name stood out beside the signatures. Edward Mills, the engineer of record, the man who signed off the structure the night before it fell. Walter's breath caught. Edward had been his apprentice once, a nervous young man who looked up to him like a father. He had vanished after the accident. Until now, that evening, Walter sat on his porch. The blueprint spread across his lap. The wind moved through the trees, carrying faint laughter from the park across the street. Children playing near the statue that stood over Daniel's grave of lies. Walter lit his pipe, the ember glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. "You buried your names under his," he murmured, looking toward the statue. "Now I'll dig them back up." He spent the next few days quietly gathering things from his workshop, a trowel, gloves, a magnifying glass, and an old recorder Daniel had once used during training. The gardener of peace became the keeper of evidence. Each night, he dug a little deeper around the statue, finding remnants of metal rods, stamped with serial numbers. When he cross-checked them with the blueprint, his heart sank. They weren't the materials approved for the bridge. The council had used a weaker steel on both projects, selling the rest for profit. He looked up at the statue again, his breath fogging in the cold air. "You didn't just build a park," he said. "You built your own confession." On the 5th night, as he packed the metal pieces into an old wooden box, a flashlight beam suddenly cut through the darkness. "Mr. Briggs?" The voice was calm but firm. Officer Ryan, the young patrolman who'd known Walter since childhood. "What are you doing out here?" Walter smiled politely, wiping his hands. "Just fixing the soil. Roots don't run right if you leave them cramped." Ryan frowned, noticing the open earth near the statue. "You're digging up the memorial?" "No," Walter said softly, his tone chilling in its calm. "I'm freeing it." Ryan hesitated. Something in Walter's eyes, something quiet but burning, made him step back. "You should head home," he said finally, his voice softer now. "It's late." Walter nodded and picked up his box. "It's later than you think," he replied. Back home, he placed the box beside the photograph of Daniel and turned on the recorder. His voice was steady, clear, and heavy with truth. "My name is Walter Briggs. What you are about to hear is the real foundation of our town." He read every signature, every falsified note, naming names like a prayer reversed into a curse. When he finished, he pressed stop and sat back, eyes closed. The clock ticked in rhythm with his heartbeat, steady and alive. The next morning, a small envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a faded photograph, the same construction site, but this one showed something he hadn't seen before. Standing in the background, half buried in mud, was Edward Mills' his apprentice, shaking hands with Mayor Kenneth, both smiling. The back of the photo had only 2 words written in pen. Still breathing. Walter's hand froze midair. The photograph trembled slightly, as if it carried weight heavier than paper. He looked toward the park through the window. Children laughing, the statue gleaming. The town had built its peace on his silence. Not anymore. He folded the photograph, slipped into his coat pocket, and whispered, "If he's alive, he'll tell me everything." The clock struck noon. Each tick echoed louder than before, like a warning. Walter glanced once more at the park before locking the door behind him. The soil was done speaking. Now it was time for the living to answer. "Every flower has a name now," Walter murmured, his cracked fingers pressing a small metal tag into the soil beneath a blooming red rose. Each tag carried a name, not of soldiers, but of the men who had built their peace on his son's grave. Rain had washed over the park all night, but the morning came bright, almost cruelly peaceful. The roses glistened under the sunlight, their petals heavy with dew and memory. The townspeople admired their beauty, unaware that each flower bloomed from Walter's anger, his grief, his quiet revenge. He stood near the fountain, trimming leaves with steady hands, his every movement precise, rehearsed, almost ritualistic. The park had become his church, his confession box, and his courtroom. "Beautiful work as always, Mr. Briggs," the mayor's wife said, passing by with bright smile. Walter looked up and gave a gentle nod. "Thank you, ma'am. They'll be in full bloom by the ceremony." His voice carried warmth, but his eyes didn't. Beneath that calm surface, something had changed. He had started keeping a small notebook in his pocket, a gardener's ledger that wasn't about plants. It listed each councilman's secret, each signature deceit, each date tied to the day Daniel died. The page edges were smudged with dirt and blood from his cracked hands. Every night, he added another detail, another truth unearthed from soil. That afternoon, he dug deeper near the bench where he found Daniel's tag. The soil gave way easily, too easily, and beneath it, the edge of a corroded box caught his shovel. He knelt, brushing it off carefully. Inside were old documents sealed in plastic, still legible. They were supply manifests, identical to the blueprints he had found. But this batch had notes in Daniel's handwriting. Unauthorized changes. "I'll report this." The word struck him like a blow. Daniel had known. His son had discovered the fraud before the collapse, and they'd silence him for it. Walter sat back on his heels, the sunlight flashing across his damp eyes. "You tried to warn them, didn't you, boy?" His voice trembled, breaking halfway through. "And they buried you just like this." He placed a single rose on the box and stood, his body heavy but his purpose sharp. That evening, Walter began marking the flower beds differently. He rearranged the rose patterns, crimson and white, to form letters when viewed from above. From the ground, it looked like art. From the air, it would spell something far colder. They lied. It was his quiet masterpiece, beauty growing over guilt. He worked long past sunset, his hands blistered, his back aching. When Officer Ryan stopped by again during his patrol, Walter greeted him with a faint smile. "You sure you should be working this late?" Ryan asked. "Old bones need rest." Walter chuckled softly, the sound hollow. Old bones have work to finish before they rest. Ryan tilted his head. "You okay, Mr. Briggs? Folks are saying you've been digging too much." "Sometimes the earth hides things," Walter replied calmly. pressing the shovel into the soil. I'm just helping it speak. Ryan frowned but didn't push further. He left with a polite nod, and Walter returned to his work. Each stroke of his spade felt like writing a confession he didn't need to sign. As the week passed, the roses opened fully, painting the park in a sea of red and white. Reporters arrived early for the upcoming Heroes Memorial Day, the mayor's favorite spectacle. The air buzzed with rehearsed speeches and cameras being set up. Walter moved quietly among them, tending to the roses, invisible as always. No one questioned why he worked so diligently, why his eyes flickered toward the statue every time the mayor passed. On the morning of the ceremony, Walter arrived before dawn. He carried with him the box of Daniel's handwriting, the altered manifest, and a folded letter addressed to the local newspaper. He placed them carefully inside a hollow beneath the central flower bed, the one that formed the heart of his coded message. Then he took a step back and whispered, "This time, your voice will grow, Daniel." As the crowd gathered, the brass band played a patriotic tune, cheerful and hollow. The mayor stepped onto the podium, his hand pressed dramatically over his heart. "We gather here," he began, "to honor the fallen, the brave, the builders of our peace." His words froze as a drone camera hovered overhead, broadcasting live to the town screens. The aerial view shifted, focusing on the park's design, and the pattern became unmistakable. The roses spelled they lied. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The mayor's voice cracked mid-sentence. "Cut the feed," someone shouted, but it was too late. The local news crew had already captured it. Walter stood in the back, hat in hand, watching the panic unfold like a slow-motion confession. The mayor's wife fainted. The police chief barked orders. Journalists rushed toward the flower beds. Walter turned away quietly, walking toward the maintenance shed. Inside, his old radio buzzed faintly. The live broadcast had continued. A reporter's voice echoed through the static. "Breaking news. Coded words found in the town memorial garden suggest decades of corruption in the park's construction. Sources say the gardener." Walter switched it off before his name could be said. He sat down on the workbench, breathing slowly, his hands trembling not from fear, but release. For the first time in 20 years, the air didn't feel heavy. The soil outside was no longer silent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Daniel's tag, holding against his chest. "You're free now, son," he whispered. But just as the quiet settled, there was a sudden knock at the shed door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Walter froze. The voice that followed was calm, too calm. "Mr. Briggs," said a man outside, "we need to talk about what you've planted." Walter's eyes lifted toward the door. The clock on the wall ticked once, loud, sharp, final. He slipped Daniel's tag into his coat pocket, his expression steady. "Then I suppose it's time to harvest." "Why are there names here, Walter?" The mayor's trembling voice cracked the crowd as his gaze swept over the park, a sea of red and white roses blooming under the morning sun, spelling words a town could no longer ignore. They lied. Cameras clicked. Gasps rippled. The smell of fresh soil mixed with the iron scent of fear. Walter didn't answer him. He stood calmly beside the statue, hands clasped behind his back, hat tilted slightly forward to shield his eyes from the glare, or perhaps to hide the small, satisfied smile forming there. The mayor's face flushed red as he barked orders to the police chief. "Remove those flowers. Now!" But the officers hesitated, their eyes fixed on a reporter already broadcasting live. "Sir," one muttered nervously, "they're saying there's something buried under there. Documents. Tags." Walter finally looked up. "Not buried," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the microphone feedback. "Planted, so truth could finally grow where lies once lived." The crowd turned to him, whispers, confusion, awe. "You think beauty hides guilt?" Walter continued, his voice gaining weight. "Every rose here fed on what you buried. The metal, the records, the blood. The earth remembers, even when men forget." The mayor took a step forward, his false confidence trembling. "You're insane, old man. You're desecrating sacred ground." Walter's gaze hardened. "Sacred?" He gestured to the marble statue. "You built your peace on my son's grave. The silence that followed was louder than any siren. The mayor's mouth fell open, but no words came. Reporters began moving closer, cameras zooming in. Walter's voice, calm but laced with fire, carried the weight of 2 decades of grief. His name was Daniel Warren Briggs. They said he died in a training accident, but he died because your men stole steel, your engineers signed lies, and you buried the truth beneath this park. Murmurs turned to outrage. The crowd's attention shifted from Walter to the officials, faces pale and sweating under the rising heat of exposure. The police chief stepped forward, stammering, "That's enough." "No," Walter interrupted softly. "Enough was 20 years ago, when I asked for his body and you gave me a folded flag." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Daniel's rusted tag, holding it up for everyone to see. "This was buried here. I found it beneath your statue of honor." The tag caught the sunlight, a flash of truth no one could look away from. One of the reporters whispered into her mic, "We're live at Greenwood Memorial Park, where shocking revelations about government fraud." The broadcast was unstoppable now. The mayor lunged forward, snatching the microphone, his voice desperate. "He's lying. He's a grieving father looking for someone to blame." But even as he spoke, a voice rose from the back of the crowd. Officer Ryan, the young patrolman. "Sir," he called, holding up a small corroded box. "We found this in the flower bed. It's full of service tags with names of the real soldiers." Gasps. A woman screamed. The chief's hand dropped from his holster. The mayor stumbled backward, his face white as marble. Walter didn't move. He just closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the chaos unfold like a song written long ago. Justice didn't roar. It bloomed, quietly, beautifully, in the heart of the park. The next minutes blurred. Police taped news vans. The mayor led away shouting half-sentences about misunderstanding. But Walter stayed where he was, beside the roses, brushing the soil gently as if calming an old friend. Ryan approached hesitant. "Mr. Briggs, the station's going to need your statement." Walter smiled faintly. "They've already got it." He nodded toward the rose beds. "Every petal tells the truth." Ryan exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You planned all this, didn't you?" Walter chuckled softly, his voice low and weary. "I just listened. The ground had been speaking for years. Someone had to hear it." As the last of the officials were escorted away, Walter walked to the base of the statue, once a monument of false heroes, and laid Daniel's tag against it. The camera light softened, fading into the quiet murmur of the departing crowd. He whispered, "They'll say you were brave now, son, but I already knew that." He stood there a moment longer, watching as a gentle breeze swept through the roses, their petals rustling like applause. Then a small hand touched his arm. A girl no older than 10 held out a rose she had picked from the ground. "My mom says heroes come back in stories," she said innocently. Was he one? Walter looked down at her, the corner of his mouth trembling into a bittersweet smile. "He still is," he said. "He's just finally being heard." She placed a rose in his hand and ran back to her mother. Walter stared at it, its stem stained with earth, its red petals vibrant and alive. He tucked it into his coat pocket, beside the tag. The sun was setting now, painting the park in gold. Workers had stopped trying to remove the roses. Instead, people began taking photos, placing candles near the statue. The park that once stood as a lie had turned into a living truth. Walter took one last look before walking toward the gate. His steps were slow but steady, his shadow stretching long behind him. Just as he reached the exit, his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. He opened it. A single line. "Edward Mills wants to talk." Walter's fingers tightened around the phone. His reflection in the screen stared back. Older, harder, yet alive in a way he hadn't been in decades. He glanced once more at the park, at the roses glowing under the twilight. "All right, then," he whispered, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Let's finish what we started." The wind rustled behind him, carrying the faint sound of petals shifting, as if the flowers themselves had spoken one final time. Make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.